I was hanging on by a thread, ready to give up. Then I found Psalm 91. What happened next changed everything. If you're facing tough times, this message is for you. Picture this. You're at your lowest point, feeling lost and alone. Now imagine finding hope in the most unexpected place. That's what happened to me. Let me tell you, I was in a dark place. Bills piling up, family falling apart, health failing. Everything was crumbling around me. I felt like I was drowning, gasping for air. Every morning, I'd wake up wondering if it was worth going on. That's when God stepped in. I stumbled upon Psalm 91 in my old dusty Bible. At first, I didn't think much of it. But those words, they grabbed hold of me and wouldn't let go. It was like a lifeline thrown to a drowning man. I couldn't explain it, but suddenly, I felt a glimmer of hope. Something was about to change, and I knew it in my bones. I want to be real with you. I wasn't always a believer. Sure, I'd grown up going to church, but as an adult, I'd drifted away. The Bible? It was just another book gathering dust on my shelf. But there I was, at rock bottom, desperately flipping through those thin pages, looking for anything to cling to. When my eyes landed on Psalm 91, I almost laughed. What good could some ancient words do? My problems were real. Bills, family issues, health scares. I needed practical solutions, not poetry. But something made me pause. Maybe it was exhaustion, maybe it was desperation, or maybe, just maybe, it was God. I started reading, skeptical at first. Whoever dwells in the shelter of the Most High will rest in the shadow of the Almighty. Rest. That sounded nice. I couldn't remember the last time I'd truly rested. My mind was always racing, worrying about the next crisis. As I kept reading, something strange happened. The words started to sink in, not just into my mind, but into my heart. I will say of the Lord, He is my refuge and my fortress, my God, in whom I trust. Trust. Now that was a foreign concept. I'd been let down so many times, by others and by myself. Could I really trust in something I couldn't see or touch? But the more I read, the more I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. It was like someone was speaking directly to my fears, my anxieties, my deepest needs. You will not fear the terror of night, nor the arrow that flies by day. How did this ancient psalm know exactly what I was going through? I'll be honest, part of me was still hesitant. It seemed too good to be true. How could simply reading these words make any real difference in my life? But another part of me, a part I'd almost forgotten existed, started to stir. It was hope, small and fragile, but undeniably there. I found myself returning to Psalm 91 again and again over the next few days. Each time, I'd discover something new, some phrase or promise that spoke directly to my situation. It was like a conversation, a back and forth between me and God, happening right there on the page. And then something truly unexpected happened. I started noticing little changes in my life. Nothing dramatic at first, just small moments of peace in the midst of chaos, fleeting feelings of strength when I'd normally feel overwhelmed. It was like finding an oasis in the desert, a source of refreshment I didn't even know I needed. Now, I'm not saying Psalm 91 magically solved all my problems overnight. That's not how it works. But it did something even more important. It changed my perspective. It reminded me that I wasn't alone in my struggles, that there was a power greater than myself that I could lean on. You know, I've heard people say that the first bite is the most important. Well, let me tell you, the first verse of Psalm 91 hit me like a ton of bricks. Whoever dwells in the shelter of the Most High will rest in the shadow of the Almighty. Rest? Now that was something I hadn't experienced in a long time. I read those words over and over, letting them sink in. It was like God was speaking directly to my weary soul. Here I was, running myself ragged, trying to solve all my problems on my own. And here was God offering me shelter, a place to catch my breath. But what did it mean to dwell in God's shelter? I started to picture it in my mind. You know how when you're caught in a rainstorm, you run for cover? That's what I felt like I'd been doing, running from one crisis to the next, never finding real shelter. But this verse was telling me there was a place I could stay, a permanent refuge. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how much I needed that shelter. My life felt like it was falling apart. Bills piling up, family problems, health issues. It was like I was standing in the middle of a hurricane. But here was God, offering me a safe place right in the eye of the storm. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. At first, I struggled with this idea of divine protection. I mean, let's face it, bad things happen to good people all the time. How could I trust that God would protect me when I'd seen so much suffering in the world? But as I kept reading and praying, I started to understand something. This shelter, this protection, it wasn't about God zapping away all my problems. It was about finding peace and strength in the midst of them. It was about knowing that no matter what happened, I wasn't facing it alone. That first verse changed how I looked at everything. Instead of waking up every morning dreading what new disaster might be waiting for me, I started to look for God's presence in my day. When the bills came, I'd take a deep breath and remember that I was under God's shadow. When family conflicts arose, I'd picture myself in that shelter, finding the strength to respond with love instead of anger. And you know what? Things started to change. Not overnight, mind you. But little by little, I felt myself standing taller, breathing easier. I wasn't so quick to panic when problems came up. I started to face challenges with a kind of calm I'd never had before. Now, don't get me wrong. This divine protection didn't mean I could just sit back and do nothing, but it gave me the courage to take action, to make tough decisions, to face my fears head on. It was like having a safety net. I could take risks knowing that even if I fell, I wouldn't be destroyed. That first verse of Psalm 91 became my go-to. Whenever I felt overwhelmed, I'd close my eyes and repeat it to myself. I'm dwelling in God's shelter. I'm resting in His shadow. It became a lifeline, a constant reminder that I wasn't alone in my struggles. You know, when I first started reading Psalm 91, I thought it was just nice words. But as I dug deeper, I realized it was so much more. It was like God was speaking directly to my situation, offering me exactly what I needed. There's this part that says, He will cover you with His feathers, and under His wings you will find refuge. Now, I'm not talking about actual feathers and wings here. It's a picture, see? God's protection, it's like a mama bird sheltering her babies. And let me tell you, I felt like a scared little bird in a big, dangerous world. Every time I read those words, I could almost feel those wings wrapping around me. When the bill collectors called, I'd close my eyes and picture myself under those wings. When the doctor's office left another worrying message, I'd whisper, God, I'm taking refuge in you right now. But it wasn't just about feeling safe. Psalm 91 talks about a fortress, a strong tower. That hit me hard. My life felt like it was crumbling, but here was God offering to be my rock-solid foundation. I started to see myself not as a victim of circumstances, but as someone who could stand firm because I had God as my fortress. Now, I'm going to be real with you. This didn't mean all my problems magically disappeared, but it changed how I faced them. Instead of panicking when another crisis hit, I'd take a deep breath and remind myself, God's got this. He's my fortress. There's another part that really spoke to me. 1,000 may fall at your side, 10,000 at your right hand, but it will not come near you. At first, I struggled with this. I mean, people suffer all the time, right? But then I realized it's not saying nothing bad will ever happen. It's saying that even in the midst of chaos, God can keep us safe. I started applying this to my everyday life. When I heard about layoffs at work, instead of letting fear take over, I'd repeat this verse. It didn't guarantee I wouldn't lose my job, but it reminded me that no matter what happened, God would see me through. The more I read Psalm 91, the more I found myself changing. I wasn't just reading words on a page. I was finding strength I didn't know I had, peace in the middle of my storms, hope when everything seemed hopeless. There's this beautiful promise near the end. He will call on me, and I will answer him. I will be with him in trouble. I will deliver him and honor him. That became my lifeline. Whenever things got tough, I'd call out to God. Sometimes it was just a whispered help in the middle of a sleepless night. And you know what? I started to feel his presence. Not in some dramatic, earth-shaking way, but in small moments of peace, unexpected kindnesses from others, strength to face another day. I want you to understand something. Psalm 91 isn't a magic spell. It's not about saying the right words and poof, all your problems vanish. It's about changing how you see your problems. It's about realizing you're not facing them alone. You know, finding hope in Psalm 91 was just the beginning. The real battle was happening inside my head. Those negative thoughts, the fear, the anxiety, they were eating me alive. But as I kept reading, I realized this psalm had something to say about that too. There's a part that says, "You will not fear the terror of night, nor the arrow that flies by day." Now, I'm not talking about literal arrows here. Those arrows were my own thoughts, piercing me with doubt and despair. Every night, I'd lie awake, my mind racing with worries. During the day, I'd be hit with waves of panic. It felt like I was under constant attack. But Psalm 91 was telling me I didn't have to live like that. It wasn't just empty words either. As I started to really believe what I was reading, something began to shift. When those anxious thoughts would come, I'd remember, I don't have to fear this. It wasn't instant, mind you. But little by little, I found myself standing up to those inner demons. Now, let me be clear. This wasn't about ignoring my problems or pretending everything was fine. It was about facing them with a new kind of strength. Psalm 91 talks about God as a shield and fortress. I started to picture that whenever I felt overwhelmed. Instead of letting my thoughts run wild, I'd take a deep breath and remind myself, God's got this. There's another verse that really hit home. If you say, "The Lord is my refuge," and you make the Most High your dwelling, no harm will overtake you. I had to learn what it meant to make God my dwelling. It wasn't just about going to church or saying a quick prayer. It was about changing where I put my trust, my hope, my focus. I started doing something every morning. Before I even got out of bed, I'd read Psalm 91. Then I'd close my eyes and picture myself surrounded by God's protection. It sounds simple, but it was powerful. Instead of waking up dreading the day, I'd start with peace. And you know what? That peace started to last longer and longer. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were still days when the darkness felt overwhelming. That's when another part of Psalm 91 became my lifeline. For he will command his angels concerning you to guard you in all your ways. I held on to that promise tight. Even when I couldn't feel it, I chose to believe that God was watching over me, sending help in ways I might not even see. The most amazing part? As I battled those inner demons with the words of Psalm 91, things started changing on the outside too. I found myself reacting differently to problems. Instead of panicking, I'd take a deep breath and look for solutions. People started noticing. "You seem different," they'd say. And I was different. Not perfect, not problem-free, but stronger. There's this part near the end of Psalm 91 that says, "Because he loves me, says the Lord, I will rescue him, I will protect him, for he acknowledges my name." That became my anchor. On good days and bad, I'd remind myself of God's love. It wasn't based on me being perfect or having it all together. It was just love. Unconditional, unwavering love. You know, it's one thing to read words on a page. It's another to see them come alive in your life. That's exactly what happened with Psalm 91. I'd been clinging to those verses like a lifeline, but I was still waiting for something big to happen. Then came that Wednesday morning. I woke up feeling different. Can't explain it, but there was this peace. Usually, my mind would be racing with worries before I even opened my eyes. But that day, calm. I remembered the words, "He who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will rest in the shadow of the Almighty." For the first time, I felt like I was actually resting in that shadow. As I got ready for work, I kept thinking about another verse. 1,000 may fall at your side, 10,000 at your right hand, but it will not come near you. Little did I know how real that was about to become. I walked into the office, and you could cut the tension with a knife. People huddled in groups, whispering. Turns out major layoffs were happening. My heart should have been pounding out of my chest, but instead, I felt protected. Not cocky, mind you, just at peace. One by one, people were called into the manager's office. Each time the door opened, someone walked out with a cardboard box. I kept repeating in my head, "God is my refuge and fortress." When my turn came, I took a deep breath and walked in. My manager looked stressed. He started talking about budget cuts and tough decisions. I was sure I was next. But then he said something that floored me. Not only was I keeping my job, but I was getting a promotion. They needed someone to lead a new project, and my name came up. I couldn't believe it. Just weeks ago, I was drowning in debt, barely holding on. Now, this promotion meant I could start tackling those bills. It wasn't just about the money, though. It was like God was saying, "I've got you." Walking out of that office, I felt like I was in a dream. People were still crying, packing up their desks, and here I was, with good news I didn't even know how to share. That's when another part of Psalm 91 hit me. "For he will command his angels concerning you to guard you in all your ways." I realized this wasn't just about me. God had put me in this position for a reason. I started reaching out to my laid-off co-workers, offering to help with resumes, making calls to contacts about job openings. It wasn't much, but it felt like I was being used as one of those angels to guard others. That night, I sat down with my Bible again. The words of Psalm 91 looked different now. They weren't just nice sayings or distant promises. They were real, living, active in my life. I thought about where I'd been just a short time ago, hopeless, scared, ready to give up. And now, hope was bubbling up inside me like a spring. Not because everything was perfect, plenty of challenges still lay ahead, but because I knew, deep in my bones, that I wasn't facing them alone. This was more than just a good day at work. It was a turning point. The moment when Psalm 91 stopped being words on a page and became my reality. God's protection, His presence. It wasn't just spiritual talk. It was practical, tangible, life-changing truth. Now, I know some folks might be skeptical about divine intervention. I was too, once upon a time. But let me tell you, after what I experienced, there's no doubt in my mind that God was working in my life through Psalm 91. Remember how I mentioned that promotion? Well, that was just the beginning. It's like once I started truly believing in God's protection, doors began to open left and right. One day, I got a call out of the blue from an old friend. Turns out, he was starting a non-profit to help families struggling with medical debt. That hit close to home, considering my own situation. He asked if I'd be interested in volunteering. Now I was already stretched thin, but something told me to say yes. Well, wouldn't you know it? Through that organization, I met a financial advisor who specialized in helping people dig out of debt. She took one look at my situation and said, "I can help you." And help she did. Within months, we had a solid plan to get me back on track. Now, you might be thinking, that's just coincidence. But here's the thing, Psalm 91 talks about God commanding his angels concerning us. I used to think of angels as these ethereal beings with harps and wings. But what if angels sometimes look like old friends with job opportunities, or financial advisors with the exact expertise you need? Let me tell you about Sarah. She was a single mom I met through that non-profit. Her son had been diagnosed with a rare illness and the medical bills were drowning her. I felt led to share Psalm 91 with her. At first, she was hesitant. "How can words in a book help me pay these bills?" she asked. But Sarah started reading it every day, just like I had. And you know what? Things started changing for her too. A specialist who normally had a 2-year waiting list had a cancellation and could see her son within a month. An anonymous donor covered a significant portion of their medical debt. Now, I'm not saying Psalm 91 is some magic spell that makes all your problems disappear. But I've seen firsthand how putting your trust in God's promises can open your eyes to opportunities you might have missed before. There was this one time when my car broke down on the highway. I was stressed, thinking about how I'd pay for repairs. But instead of panicking, I remembered Psalm 91. He will command his angels concerning you to guard you in all your ways. I closed my eyes right there on the side of the road and prayed. Not 5 minutes later, a tow truck pulled up. The driver said he'd felt a strong urge to take this route, even though it wasn't his usual area. He not only towed my car for free, but also knew a mechanic who could fix it at a fraction of the usual cost. Coincidence? Maybe. But I choose to see it as God working through people, those angels mentioned in Psalm 91. It's like once I started looking for God's hand in my life, I saw it everywhere. Now, I'm not saying life became perfect. There were still challenges, still tough days, but knowing I had this divine support system, it changed everything. Problems that used to send me into a spiral of anxiety became opportunities to see God's promises in action. Now, I'm not going to tell you that Psalm 91 made all my problems disappear overnight. That's not how it works. But it did give me the strength to face those obstacles head on. It's like I had a new pair of glasses, and suddenly I could see things differently. Take my financial situation, for example. I was drowning in debt, bills piling up faster than I could open them. Before, I'd just throw them in a drawer and try to forget about them. But Psalm 91 talks about God being our refuge and fortress. I started to think, what if I treated my finances like a fortress I needed to protect? So I sat down, spread out all those bills, and started making a plan. It wasn't easy. Some nights, I'd be up late, crunching numbers, feeling overwhelmed. But I'd remember the words, "He will cover you with his feathers, and under his wings you will find refuge." I'd take a deep breath and keep going. Little by little, things started to change. I found ways to cut expenses I never thought possible. I negotiated with creditors, something I'd been too scared to do before. And you know what? Many of them were willing to work with me. It was like God was opening doors I didn't even know existed. But it wasn't just about money. My relationships were in shambles too. Years of stress and anger had pushed away the people I cared about most. Psalm 91 says, "I will rescue him, I will protect him, for he acknowledges my name." I realized that acknowledging God meant more than just saying his name. It meant living differently. So I started reaching out, making amends. It wasn't easy. Some conversations were downright painful. But I kept coming back to the psalm, reminding myself that God was with me, even in the tough moments. One day I was talking to my brother. We hadn't spoken in years, not really. There was so much hurt between us. But as we talked, I felt this peace. Like God was right there, helping us find the right words. By the end of that conversation, we were both in tears. Good tears, you know, healing tears. Now don't get me wrong. Life didn't suddenly become all sunshine and roses. I still had bad days. Days when I wondered if anything was really changing. But that's when another part of Psalm 91 would come to mind. 1,000 may fall at your side, 10,000 at your right hand, but it will not come near you. I started to understand that this wasn't a promise that nothing bad would ever happen. It was a promise that even when things got tough, God would be right there with me. And knowing that gave me the courage to keep going, to keep trying, even when things looked impossible. There was this one time when I lost a big client at work. In the past, that would have sent me into a panic. But instead, I remembered, he will call on me and I will answer him. I will be with him in trouble. So I prayed. And then I got to work, reaching out to contacts, looking for new opportunities. Within a week, I had not one, but 2 new clients, bigger than the one I'd lost. Now, was that just luck? Maybe. But I choose to see it as God's hand at work, guiding me, opening doors I couldn't have opened on my own. You know, it's amazing how a few words on a page can completely change your life. That's what Psalm 91 did for me. It wasn't just about overcoming obstacles. It was about seeing the world in a whole new light. Before, I'd wake up dreading the day. Now, I wake up with a sense of purpose. I'm not saying every morning is sunshine and rainbows, but there's this peace. Even on tough days, I remember, he who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will rest in the shadow of the Almighty. And I feel that rest deep in my soul. My relationships, they've done a complete 180. Used to be, I'd snap at my family over the smallest things. Stress does that to you, you know? But now, I approach conflicts differently. I remember that God is my refuge and fortress. That gives me the strength to be patient, to listen, to really hear what others are saying. Take my relationship with my daughter. We'd been at odds for years. But one day, I sat her down and just listened, really listened. No judgment, no interrupting, just being present. By the end, we were both in tears. Good tears, you know. It was like God was there, healing wounds we didn't even know we had. At work, people have noticed the change too. I used to be all about climbing the ladder, stepping on whoever I had to. Now, I see my job as a way to serve others, to be those angels Psalm 91 talks about. When a co-worker is struggling, I'm there to lend a hand. When there's a tough project, I volunteer. It's not about recognition. It's about living out what I believe. My goals have shifted too. Before, it was all about making more money, getting a bigger house, a fancier car. Now, I want to make a difference. I've started volunteering at a local shelter. Seeing the gratitude in people's eyes when you serve them a hot meal, that's worth more than any promotion. But let me be clear, this journey ain't always easy. There are days when doubt creeps in, days when I wonder if I'm really changing or if it's all in my head. That's when I go back to Psalm 91. I read it out loud, let the words wash over me. Surely he will save you from the fowler's snare and from the deadly pestilence. And I remember, this is real. This is true. I've learned that faith isn't a one-time decision. It's a daily choice. Every morning, I have to decide to trust God, to live out what I believe. Some days, it's as easy as breathing. Other days, it's a struggle. But that's okay. That's part of the journey. You know what's really amazing? How Psalm 91 keeps speaking to me in new ways. I'll read a verse I've read 100 times before, and suddenly it hits me different. Like it's exactly what I need to hear in that moment. It's like having a conversation with God right there on the page. I remember this one time, I was facing a big decision at work, ethically questionable stuff. In the past, I might have gone along with it to keep the peace. But I read Psalm 91 that morning, and the words, "He is my refuge and my fortress," just jumped out at me. I realized my true security didn't come from my job or my boss's approval. It came from God. Gave me the courage to stand up and do the right thing, even when it cost me. You know, looking back on this journey with Psalm 91, I'm amazed at how much has changed. It's not just about the words on a page anymore. It's about a living, breathing relationship with God. Every day, I see His protection and love in new ways. The biggest lesson? God's always there, even when we can't see Him. Those promises in Psalm 91, they're real, they work, not like some magic spell, but as a foundation for a life of faith. I've learned that faith isn't just believing, it's acting on that belief, even when things look impossible. And let me tell you, when you step out in faith, God shows up in ways you never expected. If you love our video, please subscribe to my YouTube channel and press the bell icon.